Welcome to the debate. Today, we're asking a pretty fundamental question about how we actually judge human talent. So think about this. When you look at a photograph of a house, you don't assume you're seeing the plumbing or the wiring or, the depth of the foundation.
Right. I mean, it's a two-dimensional surface. It's just one angle.
Exactly. It's just a surface.
Nobody buys a house just by looking at a single photo and assuming they suddenly understand, the structural integrity of the roof. You need an inspection.
Right. You need an inspection. But when it comes to the professional world, specifically hiring, we treat a one-page sheet of paper, the resume, as if it is the actual house.
Yeah, we treat it like a 3D walkthrough.
We really do. We treat this incredibly compressed document as the definitive, total truth of a human being's professional capability and history. And, when we realize that one piece of paper can't possibly hold a whole career, what do we usually do?
We inflate it.
Yes. We try to fix it by inflating the claims, adding generic buzzwords, and, exaggerating the metrics until that two-dimensional facade looks like a mansion.
Which, of course, leads to the massive crisis of trust we see in the hiring market today. I mean, hiring managers just assume candidates are inflating their value.
And they usually are.
Right, but candidates feel forced to inflate their value just to get noticed by the algorithms. It is a completely vicious cycle.
And that is exactly the cycle we are dissecting today. We are exploring a core concept from the living professional record doctrine, which it fundamentally challenges how we build these documents. The source material establishes a hard rule, and I want to quote it directly here. It says, "The resume is not the record. The resume is a rendering from the record."
It's a very rigid distinction.
It is, but for me, this framework gets it exactly right. We have to stop pretending the resume is the whole truth. It is just a compressed rendering. And governing it strictly, forcing it to safely point back to a deeper, hidden reality, is frankly the only way we rebuild trust in hiring.
Well, I come at it from a different way. I completely grant you that we must root out invention and inflation. Absolutely.
Glad we agree on the basics.
And this is a big but. This doctrine's strict model of compression has some real-world consequences. Overgoverning the resume into a strictly compressed artifact risks creating this sterile, fragmented surface.
I don't think it's sterile at all.
I worry that it is. Because if we compress too much, we strip away the vital context, the actual human friction that makes a professional's history compelling in the first place. And that leaves them totally vulnerable in a highly competitive market.
Let's unpack what that compression actually looks like in practice then, because the text is very specific about the mechanism. It explicitly teaches that a resume bullet compresses evidence, context, claim, contribution, and value into a short surface.
Right. It jams all of that into one sentence.
But that compression must preserve truth. The philosophy here is that a good resume uses accurate action, appropriate scope, relevant context, and supported value. The key takeaway from the module is that it does not tell the whole story. It points back to the record. It compresses the record. It doesn't replace it.
Okay, but
By enforcing what the text calls governed selection, where every single claim is rigorously checked against actual evidence before it ever becomes surface language, we prevent the resume from becoming an inflated fiction. It acknowledges its own limitations.
That sounds incredibly logical in a vacuum. I mean, intellectually, it's very neat. But I want to talk about what happens to a human narrative when you apply what is essentially a data compression algorithm to it.
It's not an algorithm, it's discipline.
But it feels like an algorithm to the user. If you're listening to this right now and you've ever stared at a blank screen wondering how to summarize a brutal, emotionally exhausting year at your job into one bullet point, you know exactly how dangerous this idea of compression can feel.
Dangerous is a strong word.
Well, the text explicitly admits that a rendering does not tell the whole story. It even instructs the professional to intentionally leave out context that might be considered emotionally heavy if it lacks direct relevance to the decision maker.
Which is a necessary filter, isn't it? I mean, a hiring manager doesn't need to know about your workplace drama.
It's a filter, yes, but human work, especially transformative work, is inherently messy and emotionally heavy. Let's look at the text's specific example of the onboarding checklist.
Sure, great example.
The candidate creates a checklist for new hires.
The framework compresses that into a governed bullet, created shared onboarding checklists during high turnover, coordinating manager input to improve consistency for new hires.
And notice how meticulously engineered that is. It includes the accurate action created. It bounds the scope. It's an onboarding checklist, not an inflated claim about, revolutionizing enterprise HR.
Which people do claim all the time.
Exactly. And it provides relevant context with high turnover, and it states the supported value, improving consistency. It's perfect.
I agree that it's defensible, but think about the process of how that compression was achieved. When the text advises leaving out the emotionally heavy context, it introduces a massive degree of subjectivity.
How so?
What if the real value that candidate brought wasn't just the administrative act of making a checklist? What if they were stepping into a deeply toxic environment, managing panicked managers, and stabilizing a team on the brink of total collapse?
But that's...
By intentionally leaving out the friction and the sheer difficulty of the work just to make the bullets safe and strictly governed, you are flattening their actual leadership into a sterile administrative task. The rendering is so clean that it no longer resembles the human being who did the work.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how this compression actually serves the candidate. We have to understand the psychology of the reader here. The goal of the resume isn't to be a psychological profile or like a novel about your workplace trauma.
I'm not asking for a novel.
But you're asking for the emotional weight. Think about how we consume data. A resume is like dehydrated camping food. It's light, it's governed, it's extremely easy to carry through an applicant tracking system. But it's not meant to be eaten dry.
Right, you have to add water later.
Exactly. The framework actually has a great test for this. It essentially asks you to pause and ask, what is this specific bullet point supposed to help the reader decide? If the target audience is a recruiter filtering for operational capability, the emotional exhaustion of your former team just isn't decision relevant at that stage. Including it clutters the document. The compression is what makes the document legible.
Okay, so you're arguing that compression makes the document clean and legible. I understand the dehydrated food analogy, but if we scrub all that human friction out to make it clean, we run into a massive problem when we try to quantify that work. What kind of problem?
Because if you didn't perfectly track your numbers in this messy, high turnover environment, this strict framework says you aren't allowed to estimate them at all.
Yes, and that is a crucial rule. The doctrine draws a very rigorous line here. It distinguishes between a measure of performance, like scale or volume, such as trained 6 cohorts, and a measure of effectiveness, which shows actual change, like reduced repeated questions.
Right. Activity versus impact.
Exactly. And the absolute unbreakable rule is, do not invent metrics. If there are no logged numbers in your hidden record, you are forbidden from estimating a percentage on the surface. You must use supported qualitative value instead.
And this is exactly where the commitment to knowing the limits of a piece of paper ends up actively harming the candidate's visibility.
Harming them by making them tell the truth.
We do not exist in a seminar. We exist in a hiring ecosystem driven by recruiters who are explicitly trained to scan for scale, volume, and numerical impact. Let's say a candidate knows their intervention saved roughly 20 hours a week. They know this based on their expert observation of the workflow.
But they didn't measure it.
But they didn't officially log it in a time tracking software, right? The framework says they cannot claim that metric. It forces them to rely on qualitative phrasing like improved visibility. You are functionally disarming them on a battlefield where everyone else is using numbers.
I completely disagree that it disarms them. It protects them. If you didn't measure the baseline, you cannot truthfully claim you increase efficiency by 34%. You just can't. If you estimate a metric, you are writing a check your record cannot cash.
But is making an educated, expert guess on your impact really a lie? Or is it just contextual translation? I mean, if I say I reduced processing time by 20%, I am providing a heuristic, a mental shortcut, for the scale of my impact, so the recruiter can actually conceptualize it.
It is an invented metric because it isn't backed by the source layer. Evidence comes before wording. The module says proof is not permission, but without proof, you have no claim.
It just feels overly punitive to the candidate.
Let's dive into the psychology of the hiring manager for a second, because this is where the why really matters. Why does this rule exist? Imagine you put that estimated 20% on your resume. You get the interview. The hiring manager looks across the table and says, "Impressive. Walk me through the math on how you captured that 20% reduction." And you have to say, "Well, it's just an educated guess based on what I saw."
You explain your methodology for the estimate. You tell them how you arrived at that heuristic.
But in that exact second, your trust density evaporates. The hiring manager's brain instantly registers that your surface claims are disconnected from your actual evidence. They will now question every other bullet point on your resume.
That's a bit catastrophic, isn't it?
It's realistic. The doctrine protects the candidate from walking into an interview and crumbling under scrutiny. Instead, the text guides them to say something like, "Maintained weekly issue tracker that improved visibility of owners, open items, and follow-up status." It's honest. When they ask about it, your evidence perfectly matches your claim.
Look, I will concede that surviving the interview requires defensibility. You're definitely right about that. But my counterpoint is that trust density doesn't matter at all if you never get into the room because the algorithm filtered you out for lacking quantitative impact.
Trust is the only thing that matters. And by the way, it isn't just about avoiding fake numbers. It's also about boundaries, which brings us to another critical mechanism in the text, which is the doctrine of public safe rendering. We've been talking about the limits of what a piece of paper can prove, but we also have to talk about the limits of what a piece of paper is allowed to expose.
You mean confidentiality?
Exactly. Some of the absolute strongest professional work is highly confidential. Let's use the text healthcare example. A candidate might have coordinated documentation for a sensitive client, dealing with protected patient data, internal billing workflows, proprietary software, all of that.
A very common scenario.
Right. In the traditional inflated resume model, the candidate either illegally exposes the data to sound impressive, or they just leave their best work off the document entirely. The LPR system provides a mechanism to compress that private record into a public safe rendering.
So what does that look like?
The bullet becomes supported documentation coordination during a regulated healthcare implementation, helping clarify workflow updates for internal stakeholders. It protects the privacy boundary while still proving the capability.
Okay, that's a fair point on privacy. But look at the exact sentence you just read. Supported documentation coordination during a regulated healthcare implementation. If we strip out the client name, the specific data types, the financial stakes, and the internal workflow mechanics just to make it public safe, haven't we just created the exact kind of vague, untethered language this system was built to destroy?
Not at all. It is governed.
It reads as completely generic. The text itself warns against flattening a professional into generic professionalism. But when you apply the strict public safe masking, taking out all the identifying markers, what you are left with is a sentence that could describe thousands of mid-level project managers. It is so sanitized of risk that it is also sanitized of distinction. It ceases to be a compelling argument of this specific individual's unique value.
That's an interesting point, though. I would firmly push back on your definition of generic. I think you're conflating generic language with governed language. Let's look at how they function differently. Generic language relies on unsupported identity labels and slogans.
Like what?
If a resume says, "results-driven professional with a proven track record of cross-functional excellence," that is generic. Why? Because it means absolutely nothing and points to no specific evidence. The public safe rendering, supported documentation coordination during a regulated healthcare implementation is not generic.
Just because it lists a sector?
Because it is specific to a function, a sector, and an outcome. Even if the proprietary nouns are masked, it is structurally sound. It proves you understand the compliance environments of healthcare, even if you can't name the hospital. And more importantly, you are evaluating this compressed bullet as if it is the final destination of the candidate's career narrative.
It is for the recruiter reading it.
But the doctrine makes it explicitly clear that the compressed resume is merely a part of a larger ecosystem. Its only job, its sole epistemological burden, is to create enough confidence for the next interpretive event.
The interview.
Exactly, the interview. This is where we go back to our dehydrated camping food analogy. The text introduces this brilliant concept of rehydration. The resume compresses a record, but the interview rehydrates the record.
Right.
When the candidate finally sits down with the hiring manager, they take that highly governed, compressed bullet about the healthcare implementation and they add the boiling water. They expand it. They bring back the situation, the constraints they faced, the specific decisions they made, and the learning that occurred without violating confidentiality, of course.
Ideally, yes.
The interview answers don't just repeat the resume. They rehydrate the compressed claim using the deep well of the hidden record. The system is designed this way because human beings are meant to scan surfaces quickly, but we build trust through deep conversational exploration.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why this is the most glaring structural flaw in this entire framework.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's hear it.
You are arguing that the heavily compressed, sterilized resume is perfectly fine because it will be miraculously rehydrated in the interview. But a resume cannot rehydrate if it never reaches the interview stage.
But it will reach the interview stage because the claims are highly relevant and credible to the target audience. The framework includes market translation tools to ensure the rendering aligns with what a specific market lane actually values.
That assumes the audience has the patience, the time, and the sophisticated reading to comprehension to look at a highly compressed, public-safe, mathematically cautious bullet point and instantly recognize the hidden depth behind it. By forcing the resume to be a strictly compressed surface that merely points back to the record, you are placing an impossible burden on a highly sanitized document.
How so? I mean, it's just stating the truth clearly.
You are demanding that a document, stripped of its emotional weight, stripped of its educated estimations of impact, and stripped of its proprietary specifics, somehow generate enough excitement to beat out 100 other candidates who are presenting fully inflated, vivid, highly narrative resumes. You are asking a candidate to bring a whisper to a shouting match.
A whisper.
Yes! And you're promising them that if they just whisper quietly enough, someone will invite them into a soundproof room to finally let them sing. The rehydration dependency is a massive systemic risk for the user.
I see the risk you're pointing to. You're arguing that in a noisy market, governed compression might be interpreted as a lack of capability. But I would counter that hiring managers are deeply exhausted by the shouting match.
Are they? Because they keep rewarding it?
I mean, think about the reality of recruitment right now. They are drowning in AI-generated, perfectly optimized keyword-stuffed resumes that completely collapse under 5 minutes of questioning. The doctrine recognizes that a resume bullet that compresses evidence, context, and claim without overpromising actually carries a completely different frequency.
A lower frequency.
No, it carries the frequency of trust. When a hiring manager reads a summary that says, operations professional with experience turning scattered processes into clearer tools, supported by work in onboarding coordination and issue tracking, they aren't reading a whisper. They are reading a clear, undeniable signal amidst the noise. They recognize it precisely because it isn't making impossible claims. It doesn't trigger their internal alarm bells.
That is a highly optimistic view of the modern recruiter's attention span. You are betting the candidate's entire livelihood on the assumption that a recruiter will stop and appreciate the subtle honesty of a governed bullet point.
It is a view grounded in the reality of how human beings actually interpret claims and evaluate risk over the long term. If we accept the doctrine that the surface is not the source, then we must have the discipline to let the surface be a surface.
Even if it hurts short-term conversion rates.
If we try to pack the entire complexity of a human career onto a single sheet of paper, we aren't providing better context. We are just creating a different kind of noise. We are violating privacy boundaries, exposing the candidate to defensibility risks in the interview, and ultimately, we are still failing to capture the whole truth. Because text alone can never hold the totality of human experience.
And on that philosophical point, we actually agree. Text cannot hold the totality of a human career. Where we fundamentally diverge is on the practical application of this compression.
Right.
I maintain that while the source-to-surface discipline taught in the text is intellectually rigorous, overgoverning the resume risks diluting the professional's actual impact. By rigidly enforcing the omission of qualitative friction, forbidding the educated estimation of metrics, and mandating extreme public safe masking, the system strips away the very contextual tissue that makes a career recognizable. It places far too much burden on a future rehydration interview that, for many candidates lost in the ATS algorithm, may never actually come.
And I will maintain that the doctrine correctly identifies the limits of what a piece of paper can do. It must be governed by evidence and privacy. It is designed to be honest, safe, and specific enough to trigger the next step. Accepting that the resume is merely a compressed rendering, a surface that points back to the truth, rather than attempting to embody it, is the only sustainable way to build professional trust. Trying to make a one-page document tell the whole story only leads to inflation, vulnerability, and ultimately a total breakdown in how we value talent.
Well, we both agree that treating the resume as the sole source of truth is a historical mistake. The tension remains entirely in the threshold of translation. How much contextual tissue can a compressed surface safely omit before it stops resembling the professional entirely?
That is the profound question this framework asks every professional to answer when they look at their own hidden record. It challenges anyone analyzing their own career documentation to look at their materials and ask, what version of the truth belongs here?
And is that version strong enough to survive the elements of the modern job market?
Exactly. It forces us to realize that when we hand someone a resume, we aren't giving them the house. We are just handing them a highly governed, heavily filtered blueprint. The question we leave you with today is, when the hiring manager looks at your blueprint, do they see enough structural integrity to want to walk through the front door?